Imagine you are a senior mathematician at the National Security Agency.
Right, the NSA.
Yeah. You've got access to, supercomputers that can unravel foreign military encryptions before your morning coffee even gets cold.
Absolutely, the best technology in the world.
Exactly. You understand the fundamental architecture of information. And yet, and this is the crazy part, you are entirely stumped by a piece of paper.
A piece of paper mailed to a newspaper.
Mailed to a newspaper by a guy in a homemade executioner's hood who, by the way, couldn't even spell the word paradise correctly.
He spelled it with a C.
Right. With a C. That is the paradox that we are stepping into today for this deep dive.
It really is. I mean, it's the ultimate collision of high-level forensic science and just the chaotic, messy reality of human psychopathy.
It's completely wild.
And, it is incredibly frustrating for investigators because we expect criminal investigations, especially these massive famous ones, we expect them to eventually yield to the scientific method.
Yeah, we want that clean ending.
Exactly. We expect a fingerprint to match a database or a DNA sample to isolate a suspect and just provide a clean binary resolution, guilty or not guilty.
But looking through this massive stack of files that you, our listener, have provided for us today, and I mean, we're looking at a mountain of data here.
Oh, it's extensive.
We've got original 1960s police reports, highly technical cryptographic white papers from 2020, exhaustive suspect dossiers, and it becomes immediately clear that the standard investigative machinery just totally breaks down here.
It completely stalls.
Yeah, the fingerprint landscape is contaminated, the DNA is degraded, and, the eyewitness testimony is totally fractured by trauma.
We're operating in the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters.
Yeah.
Which is why our approach today has to be very distinct.
Right. We need a different angle.
Yeah, because it is so easy to get swept up in the pop culture shadow this case casts, right? The sensationalism, the mythology, the movies.
The Zodiac movies, all the true crime forums.
Exactly. But behind the cryptic letters and the bizarre costumes, there were real victims, young people whose lives were violently, senselessly cut short.
Which is so important to remember.
So to truly understand this case, we have to strip away the mythology. We have to look dispassionately at the sequence of events and the physical evidence.
So our mission for this deep dive is to act strictly as clinical investigators. We are cutting through the noise today.
I like that. Clinical.
Yeah. First, we are going to construct a meticulous minute-by-minute timeline of the most brazen attack on record to understand the physical reality of the killer.
The Lake Berryessa attack.
Right. Then we're going to tear down the mathematics of his psychological warfare to see exactly how his most infamous cipher was finally broken after half a century.
That's the Z340.
Yep. And finally, we are going to build a comparative forensic matrix to test the circumstantial rumors against the cold, hard science for the two most prominent suspects.
And to really grasp the physical reality of this killer, we have to look at the attack that deviates entirely from his established baseline.
Right, because before this, he had a very specific way of doing things.
He did. Up until late September of 1969, the recognized attacks Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs. They operated on a very specific, honestly cowardly methodology.
Nighttime shootings.
Nighttime shootings. Isolated lovers' lanes. The killer utilized the element of total surprise in the dark. He'd walk up to parked vehicles and use a handgun, a .22 caliber in the first attack, a 9mm in the second.
So he's just walking up, shooting, and running.
Exactly. He overwhelmed the victims with sudden explosive violence, and then he just vanished back into the night. It was a stealthy, hit-and-run approach designed to absolutely minimize his own exposure.
But then the need for absolute control that he displayed with those quick, shadowy attacks suddenly evolves into something much more terrifying when we arrived at September 27, 1969.
Lake Berryessa.
Lake Berryessa. It completely upends the established modus operandi. I mean, we are suddenly looking at a daylight attack.
In broad daylight.
Yeah. And he uses a blade instead of a firearm as his primary instrument of violence. And, most shockingly, he doesn't just strike from the shadows. He presents himself in a highly elaborate, hand-sewn theatrical costume.
Which is, moving from a nighttime shooting to a daytime, close quarters stabbing while wearing a hooded costume, that represents a massive escalation in risk.
Oh, totally.
Think about it. If a single park ranger drives by or a boat passes too close to the shore, he is caught in broad daylight wearing a literal executioner's outfit.
You can't just casually walk away dressed like that.
No, you cannot easily blend into a crowd. But this escalation in risk is directly tied to an escalation in his need for psychological dominance.
Okay, unpack that a bit. What do you mean?
Well, he wasn't just looking to kill anymore. He was looking to perform. He wanted to induce a specific, prolonged state of terror, forcing his victims to interact with this monstrous persona he had created.
Wow. Okay, let's build the timeline of that performance, strictly based on the police reports and the files you gave us. Because there is a crucial window of time before the violence actually begins that gives us a rare, unfiltered look at the man behind the mask.
This is critical,
Now let's
yes.
start at 2:50 p.m. on that Saturday.
So this is the pre-attack scouting phase. The geography of Lake Berryessa is really important here. It's a large reservoir, and the killer is looking for victims in isolated pockets.
He needs somewhere quiet.
He needs an environment he can control. So at roughly 2:50 p.m., 3 young women are parked near the lake, preparing to sunbathe. They notice a man observing them.
Just staring at them.
Yeah, and he is behaving suspiciously enough, watching them from a distance, moving closer, then retreating, that they actively take note of his physical features.
Which is a huge detail for us. What did they see?
They describe a heavy-set white male, estimating him to be about 6 feet tall and weighing around 200 pounds.
And what's vital here is that they aren't the only ones who see him. A dentist and his son also spot a man matching this exact physical description in the same general area.
Just looking at them intently before hurrying off.
Yeah. And the fact that a dentist observed him, I mean, that's an interesting investigative detail, right?
Oh, absolutely. Dentists and medical professionals are highly trained to observe facial structures, jaw lines, physical proportionality.
Right. They study faces for a living.
Exactly. So these independent sightings at 2:50 p.m. are perhaps the most vital pieces of circumstantial evidence we possess,
Why is that?
because the man was seen without the hood.
He was just a guy in regular clothes.
Precisely. The 3 women were later able to work with a photographer from the Napa Valley Register to create a composite sketch using an identikit.
Okay, so we actually get a real look at him.
Yes. This gives us a baseline for his physical dimensions, his height, his build, his general demeanor, before those biometrics were heavily distorted by the baggy, bizarre costume he would utilize later in the day.
Okay, so he's scouting. He's looking for the right geometry for an ambush. Let's fast forward to approaching 4:40 p.m.
The victims arrive.
Right. The eventual victims, Brian Hartnell, who is a 20-year-old college student, and Cecilia Shepard, a 22-year-old student, arrive at the lake. They walk out onto a small island that is connected by a narrow sand spit to a larger landmass known as Twin Oak Ridge.
It's a beautiful, peaceful afternoon,
They are reading, they are talking, and they are completely isolated.
and they have unknowingly placed themselves in the exact environmental trap the killer has been searching for.
Because of the water.
Yes, the water limits their avenues of escape, and the topography of the ridge gives the attacker a high ground from which to observe and approach unseen.
So sometime later, as we approach 6:03 p.m., the atmosphere shifts. Cecilia Shepard notices a man watching them from behind a tree.
But the heavyset man from 2:5 p.m. is gone.
Right. The visual that steps out from behind the tree is pure calculated nightmare fuel.
It really is.
He is wearing a black, square-topped executioner's hood. It's meticulously sewn, falling down over his shoulders to drape like a bib across his chest.
And the sunglasses.
Yeah, he has clip-on sunglasses fastened over the eye holes to completely obscure his eyes. And emblazoned in white on the chest of this black bib is a perfectly measured 3 by 3 inch crosshair symbol.
The exact crosshair the killer had been using to sign his taunting letters to the press.
Right. It is the physical embodiment of a media myth. He has taken the 2-dimensional symbol from the newspapers and turned it into a 3-dimensional instrument of terror.
Which brings us to the interaction.
Ugh.
He closes the distance, brandishing a handgun.
A .45 caliber, right?
Yes. Brian Hartnell, who had some familiarity with firearms, identified it as a .45 caliber semi-automatic. But here is where the mechanics of the ambush become deeply psychological.
Because he doesn't just start shooting.
No, he doesn't fire. He doesn't immediately attack. He speaks.
What does he say?
In a calm, slow, monotonous voice, he delivers an incredibly specific, rehearsed narrative. He tells Hartnell and Shepard that he is an escaped convict.
He even named a prison, didn't he?
He did. He names a specific prison, Deer Lodge, in Montana. He claims he killed a prison guard to escape, that he is completely broke, and that he is desperate.
But he says he doesn't want to hurt them.
Right. He assures them he only needs the keys to their car and their money so he can drive down to Mexico and disappear.
I look at this. I mean, this is a masterclass in what criminologists refer to as a compliance tactic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We have to analyze the geometry and the physical reality of the scene.
Okay. Yeah.
Brian Hartnell is an exceptionally tall, capable young man. If this bizarre figure in a hood simply charges at them with a bayonet in broad daylight, Hartnell's fight-or-flight system is going to trigger immediately.
He's going to fight back.
Yeah.
Or they run into the water.
Exactly. He is going to fight back or they scramble away. Either way, the killer loses the total silent control of the scene that he so desperately craves.
So it's almost like a hostage negotiation, but inverted.
That's a great way to put it.
A negotiator promises safety to get compliance. The killer is doing the exact same thing. It's a magician's misdirection.
Yes. By introducing this elaborate lie, I'm just a desperate robber, I just need your car, give me what I want and you'll survive, he actively de-escalates the panic.
He offers them a psychological escape hatch.
And the specificity of the lie naming Deer Lodge, Montana, adds a layer of verisimilitude. It gives the victims a logical reason to believe him. He lowers their defenses so that they will submit to the next phase of his plan without putting up a physical fight.
Which brings us to the binding. The killer produces pre-cut lengths of plastic clothesline.
But he doesn't tie them himself at first.
Right. He orders Cecilia Shepard to tie up Brian Hartnell. She complies, obviously terrified, but operating under the false promise that if they just follow the script of the robbery, they will be left stranded but alive.
It's heartbreaking.
It really is. But the killer is meticulous. He checks Shepard's work. He finds the knots around Hartnell's wrists to be too loose.
So what does he do?
He actually holsters his firearm, physically bends down, and tightens Hartnell's bindings himself, securing his wrists brutally tight behind his back. He then binds Shepard.
And right there, the compliance tactic has achieved its exact purpose.
They're defenseless.
The victims are face down on the ground, completely immobilized. The killer has transitioned from being an armed threat, holding them at a distance, managing the risk of a counterattack, to having total, unchallenged physical control over their bodies.
And the moment that control is absolute, the illusion of the robbery shatters. Hartnell is literally still talking to the man, offering him money, trying to explain how to start his car.
He still thinks it's a robbery.
Completely.
Yeah.
He is caught entirely off guard. The killer doesn't ask for the keys again. Without a single word, he draws a long-bladed knife, which Hartnell later described as resembling a heavy bayonet or a wood-handled weapon.
And then the violence starts.
He kneels down beside Hartnell, and in a sudden explosion of frenzied violence, he stabs him in the back 6 to 8 times.
My God.
He then turns to Shepard, who is forced to watch this happen, and he stabs her 10 times.
The juxtaposition of the calm, methodical binding process against the sudden, savage, close-quarters knife attack is just chilling.
That's awful.
He brought a gun, but he explicitly chose to use a knife for the actual violence. This highlights the highly ritualistic nature of this specific attack.
He wanted to be close.
He wanted the physical resistance of the blade, the tactile proximity to the victims. He wanted to feel the life draining from them. It is a terrifying evolution from a man who previously just shot into dark cars and ran away.
So after inflicting these catastrophic injuries, the killer simply stops. He stands up, leaves them bleeding out on the sandspit, and walks away.
He doesn't even run.
No, he just hikes 500 yards up the embankment to Knoxville Road, where the victims' vehicles are parked, and this is where we witness his compulsion for recognition.
The message on the car door.
Yes. He walks up to Hartnell's white Volkswagen Carmen Ghia. He takes out a thick, black felt tip marker, and right there on the passenger side door, he draws his 3x3 crosshair symbol.
And the dates.
Right. Underneath the symbol, he writes the dates of his 2 previous attacks. Vallejo 12, Tarani 68, 7, Terramore 69. Then he adds the current date and time, 27, 69, 6.38. And finally, he signs off with the phrase, by knife.
It is an act of extreme narcissism. He is curating his own legacy in real time, leaving a literal billboard at the crime scene.
Yeah, drawing on a car door with a marker takes time.
Think about the mechanics of it. It requires deliberation. He cannot stomach the idea that this attack, because it features a completely new weapon and methodology, might be dismissed as a random robbery or the work of a different drifter.
He has to take the credit.
He is meticulously linking this new, highly deviant crime back to his established mythology.
Well, the aftermath of this ambush is devastating. The killer drives away. A fisherman and his son, who were stationed in a nearby cove, hear the faint, desperate screams for help carrying over the water.
Thank goodness they were there.
Yeah, they discover the horrific scene. Hartnell, in an incredible display of sheer will, is still conscious. He manages to roll his body over to Shepard and actually unties her bindings using his teeth.
Which is just unimaginable strength.
Park rangers are alerted, and Napa County deputies Dave Collins and Ray Land rush to the scene. When they arrive, the sheer brutality of the attack is evident, but miraculously, both victims are still alive.
Cecilia was able to speak, wasn't she?
She was. Cecilia Shepard is remarkably lucid. She gives Deputy Land a highly detailed description of the attacker, the hood, the specific crosshair symbol, the clip-on sunglasses before the shock overtakes her and she lapses into a coma.
It's so tragic.
Tragically, she succumbs to her injuries 2 days later at Queen of the Valley Hospital. Hartnell, however, survives to provide his terrifying, detailed account of the interaction.
And while the deputies are rushing to the lake and the victims are fighting for their lives, the killer is finalizing the performance of his timeline.
Right. It's 7:04 p.m. The attack occurred around 6:30. The killer has driven roughly 27 miles down from Lake Berryessa into downtown Napa.
To a payphone.
Yeah. He pulls up to a car wash. He walks over to a public payphone. He dials the Napa County Sheriff's Department. A dispatcher answers, and the killer says, in that same slow, monotonous voice he used with the victims, "I want to report a double murder. They are 2 miles north of park headquarters. They were in a white Volkswagen Carmen Ghia."
Oh, cold.
The dispatcher tries to engage him to get his name or location, and he simply replies, "I'm the one who did it," and leaves the phone off the hook, dangling by its cord.
Leaving the receiver off the hook is a deliberate, taunting gesture. It's his way of saying, I was right here speaking to you, and you still can't catch me.
But he made a mistake there.
He did. His arrogance led to a rare tactical error. A local radio reporter actually tracked down the ringing phone shortly after the broadcast went out. Investigators were able to process that specific payphone, and from the receiver, they recovered a wet palm print.
Okay, when we say a wet palm print, we're talking about the mechanics of how latent prints are left behind, right?
Exactly. A latent print is formed by the natural oils and sweat on human skin adhering to a surface.
And he was probably sweating a lot.
In moments of extreme adrenaline and physical exertion, like violently stabbing 2 people and then driving 27 miles in a state of hyperarousal, the sweat glands go into overdrive.
So he left a really clear mark.
The killer left a heavily saturated, highly detailed impression of his palm on the plastic receiver. It is one of the very few pieces of hard, physical trace evidence successfully recovered during the entire spree.
But they never matched it.
Maddeningly, no. It has never been definitively matched to a suspect in any database.
Wow. Okay, so we have built the strict timeline of the physical attack, but as clinical investigators, we have to address the discrepancies in the files, specifically regarding the witness statements.
Yes, the height and weight estimates.
Right, because this is where the investigative waters get incredibly murky and where defense attorneys make their living.
Well, human memory, especially memory encoded under extreme duress and mortal terror, is an incredibly fragile and malleable thing.
But let's look at the core physical discrepancy. Brian Hartnell, who survived and spent the most time in close proximity to the killer, described the attacker as being somewhere between 5'8" and 5'10" and very heavy, perhaps 225 to 250 pounds.
Right.
But the 3 women who observed the suspicious man earlier at 2:50 p.m., the man we strongly presume to be the killer before he donned the costume, placed him much taller, closer to 6 foot, and leaner, around 200 pounds.
That's a significant difference.
Even Hartnell himself, in later years when revisiting the memory, reassessed his initial estimates. So how do forensic psychologists reconcile a difference of potentially 4 inches in height and 50 pounds in weight?
We have to analyze the specific context and the biometrics of the observation itself. First, we must look at the observer. Brian Hartnell is an exceptionally tall individual, standing well over 6 feet. When you are that tall, your visual baseline for estimating the height of people shorter than you is fundamentally skewed. Looking down at an individual, the vertical difference between a man who is 5'9" and a man who is 6'0" can compress significantly.
Right, it's the baseline effect. If I'm looking down at the top of your head, my brain struggles to accurately measure the distance from your shoes to your scalp.
Precisely. Secondly, and perhaps more importantly, we have to deconstruct the costume.
The baggy clothes.
Yes. The executioner's hood was described as square-topped, resting heavily on the shoulders, and the clothing itself was described as dark, baggy, perhaps a windbreaker or a pleated jacket.
And that changes everything.
We know from forensic video analysis and eyewitness studies that dark, voluminous clothing fundamentally distorts the human silhouette. It masks the true anatomical line of the shoulders, the waist, and the hips. It makes a human being look much wider and therefore considerably heavier than they actually are.
And the hood.
Furthermore, the square-topped hood completely obscures the exact crown of the head, making a precise height estimation nearly impossible.
So if a 6-foot, 200-pound man puts on a baggy, dark, pleated outfit and a weird flat-topped hood that hides his skull, he suddenly transforms into a 5'9", 250-pound block of a human being. It changes his entire geometry.
It completely alters perception. Add to that the neurobiology of trauma.
Right, the adrenaline.
When a weapon is drawn, the victim's sympathetic nervous system triggers. Adrenaline floods the brain. Focus narrows sharply to the source of the threat, the gun, the knife, the symbol on the chest.
I think they call that weapon focus, right?
Exactly, weapon focus. The brain stops clinically estimating height and weight and starts calculating survival. Conversely, the women at 2:50 p.m. were observing a man in normal street clothes from a safe distance without the extreme neurochemical stress of a weapon pointed at them.
So their estimate is probably better.
Therefore, their baseline estimate of 6'8", and 200 pounds is generally considered by investigators to be the far more reliable biometric data point.
The need for absolute control, this intense theatricality and manipulation of perception we see at Lake Berryessa, it flows perfectly into the next phase of our investigation.
The psychological aspect.
Yes, because the Zodiac didn't just want to physically bind and control his victims. He wanted to intellectually bind and control the police, the media, and the entire public consciousness.
And to understand how he attempted to do that, we have to transition from the physical crime scene to a battlefield of psychological warfare and applied mathematics. We have to look at the ciphers.
Let's dissect the 51-year history of the Z340 cipher and the exact mechanism of its defeat.
It's a fascinating story.
Back in August of 1969, before the Berryessa attack, the Zodiac mailed his first code to 3 different newspapers. It was a 408-character cipher split into 3 parts. His demand was simple: print this on front page or I go on a weekend killing spree.
And the papers printed it.
The papers complied. And the killer likely sat back believing he was this untouchable Moriarty-level mastermind playing a game no one else could comprehend. But what actually happened?
It got cracked almost immediately.
Just 8 days later, a high school teacher from Salinas named Donald Hardin and his wife Betty cracked the entire thing at their kitchen table.
It was a brilliant piece of amateur deduction. The Hardins recognized that the 408 cipher was a homophonic substitution cipher.
Okay, let's break that down for the listener. What is that?
In a simple substitution cipher, the letter E, the most common letter in the English language, might always be replaced by a hashtag.
Right, so you just count the symbols.
Exactly. A code breaker simply counts the symbols, finds that the hashtag appears most frequently, and logically deduces it represents E. To counter this, a homophonic substitution assigns multiple different symbols to the most common letters.
Oh, I see.
So E could be a square, a triangle, a plus sign, or a dot. This flattens out the statistical peaks, making traditional frequency analysis much more difficult.
But the Hardins didn't rely purely on math. They relied on psychology.
Right, they profiled them.
They assumed the killer had a massive, fragile ego, so the cipher almost certainly started with the word I, and they assumed he would brag about his crimes, so the word kill was highly likely to appear.
And it did.
By finding the repeating geometric patterns in the code that match the letter structures of those specific words, they unraveled the whole thing in a week.
It was a massive, humiliating blow to his ego.
He must have been furious.
He thought he was a grand architect of chaos, and a schoolteacher defeated him over a weekend. So when November 8th, 1969 rolls around, he mails a new cipher to the San Francisco Chronicle.
The Z340.
This is the infamous Z340. It consists of 340 characters arranged in a dense rectangular grid. And this code was engineered not just to hide a message, but to actively punish anyone who dared to try and read it.
And punish them it did. For 51 years, the Z340 defeated everyone.
The best minds in the world.
The FBI's cryptanalysis unit, the CIA, the NSA, and thousands of brilliant civilian codebreakers all hit a brick wall. So how did he build this mathematical cage? It wasn't just a homophonic substitution this time. He added layers.
He added a layer of transposition.
Meaning what, exactly?
In cryptography, transposition means you don't just change the letters to symbols. You physically scramble their location within the grid based on a specific rule.
So even if you decode the symbols, it's still scrambled.
Even if you magically possessed the cipher key and knew what every single symbol meant, reading the grid left to right would just yield absolute gibberish. The letters are mathematically scattered.
And then he added the reading pattern. The absolute nightmare layer, the decimation pattern.
He employed a very specific, non-linear geometric pattern to dictate how the text flowed.
So how are you supposed to read it?
Instead of reading across the row, left to right, the intended recipient had to read it diagonally, specifically one row down and two columns across.
Like the movement of a knight in a game of chess.
Yes, but continuous. And when the reader hit the edge of the 17-column grid, they had to wrap around to the other side of the same grid, continuing the one down, two across pattern.
It's like playing Pac-Man.
That's a perfect analogy.
When you move off the right side of the screen, you instantly appear on the left side, still moving in the same trajectory. So to recap this madness, you have symbols representing multiple different letters, their order is completely scrambled, and you have to read them diagonally while wrapping around the page.
It's incredibly complex.
But even with all that complexity, supercomputers should be able to crack it, right? Why did it take half a century?
Because of the human element. The killer made mistakes.
He messed up his own code.
When writing out this massive, incredibly complex grid by hand, he made unintentional coding errors. He skipped spaces. He misaligned his own diagonal reading pattern.
Oh, wow.
In cryptography, a decryption algorithm looks for mathematical perfection. It relies on the rules of the cipher being consistently applied. When the Zodiac made these sloppy human errors, he inadvertently destroyed the mathematical symmetry that modern decryption algorithms rely on to find a foothold.
So he made it harder just by being bad at it.
He accidentally made it exponentially harder by simply being bad at his own game.
Which brings us to the monumental breakthrough. The year is 2020. Enter three amateur sleuths. David Orenchak, an American web designer who had been obsessed with the cipher for 14 years.
Sam Blake.
Yes, Sam Blake, an applied mathematician from Australia, and Jarl van Eyck, a warehouse worker and self-taught programmer from Belgium. None of them work for military intelligence, but together they crack the uncrackable. Let's look at the how.
It was the perfect synthesis of human hypothesis generation and raw AI brute force computation.
They used a specific program, didn't they?
Yes, Jarl van Eyck had written a highly specialized software program called AZDecrypt. This wasn't a standard off-the-shelf decryption tool.
Right, because I was reading about AZDecrypt, and it was specifically engineered to handle the messy, error-prone reality of the Zodiac's handwriting.
It was built for this.
And the way it scores language is fascinating. When the software looks at a string of decoded letters, it uses n-gram analysis. It looks at bigram's two-letter combinations and trigram's three-letter combinations.
Because certain letters always go together.
Exactly. In English, th is a highly common bigram. qx is almost non-existent. The software uses Markov chains to score thousands of variations per second, basically asking, mathematically, how closely does the string of letters resemble the statistical frequency of the English language?
Exactly. Sam Blake generated 650,000 different possible ways.
Yeah.
The 340 grid could be rearranged, 650,000 transposition variants.
And they just fed them all in.
They fed all of these into AZCrypt. But the absolute genius of Van Eyck's update to the software was that it automatically inserted white spaces to divide potential words based on those English language statistics.
That's a huge detail, because in the original handwritten grid, it's just a solid wall of symbols. There are no spaces.
Not at all.
So even if the computer gets the decryption perfectly right, the output is a giant block of text like THEA, PPLEIS, or ED. It looks like nonsense to a human eye until you realize where the spaces go.
The software handled that spatial division automatically.
Which is incredible.
It evaluated those 650,000 variants, running computationally massive operations. And then, human intuition took over to guide the machine.
December 3rd, 2020. The aha moment. David Orenchak is staring at the output from AZDecrypt, and suddenly, through the mathematical static, actual phrases start to emerge.
He starts reading real words.
He sees the words "hope you are." He sees "gas chamber." And then, the smoking gun appears on the screen. The phrase that proved, without a shadow of a doubt, that they had the correct solution.
It's chilling.
A partial sentence reading, "That wasn't me on the TV show."
We have to understand the historical context of why that specific phrase acts as an unbreakable timestamp for the solution.
Right. What was the TV show?
On October 22, 1969, just a couple of weeks before the Z340 was mailed, a man called into a Leih's morning television program, the Jim Dunbar AM San Francisco show.
The one with Melvin Belly?
Yes. The famous defense attorney Melvin Belly was a guest on the panel. The caller claimed to be the Zodiac Killer. On live television, sounding erratic and terrified, the caller repeatedly stated, "I don't want to go to the gas chamber."
But the police traced that call, right? It wasn't him.
It wasn't the Zodiac. It was a patient from a local mental institution named Eric Weil, suffering from severe delusions.
Wow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now imagine the real Zodiac Killer sitting at home watching a terrified, erratic man on live television, claiming his terrifying legacy. He was absolutely enraged.
Because it's all about his ego.
His entire psychological motivation was ego, control, and notoriety. He couldn't stand an imposter stealing his spotlight, especially an imposter acting cowardly about the gas chamber.
So he writes about it.
So he embeds this highly specific, highly topical grievance right into the heart of his new, supposedly uncrackable cipher.
That wasn't me on the TV show. I'm not afraid of the gas chamber. It's incredible. Only the real killer, reacting to a specific event that happened just weeks prior, would write that.
Exactly.
It's not a generic threat. It's a specific complaint. The FBI's cryptanalysis unit verified the team's work 2 days later. 51 years of mystery, solved by a web designer, a mathematician, and a warehouse worker.
But we must acknowledge the bittersweet reality of the decoded message.
Yeah, it didn't really tell us much.
The plain text itself yielded no actual forensic clues. No name, no address, no confession to a specific unknown crime. It was just more of his dark, narcissistic mythology about collecting slaves for paradise, spelled with a C, of course, maintaining his signature spelling errors.
But the methodology of the solution is what matters, I think.
Absolutely.
This breakthrough proved that standard cryptography is entering a new era. Human intuition, guessing the reading pattern, realizing the significance of the TV show reference, combined with the relentless, unyielding brute force of machine learning and statistical language modeling, is the future of forensic cryptography.
Which leads us directly into the final phase of our analysis. We've established how he killed physically at Lake Berryessa. We have established how he coded his psychological warfare in the Z340.
We understand his methods intimately.
Who was he?
This is where we build our comparative forensic matrix. Looking through the dossier in your files, there are dozens of suspects. But we're going to focus entirely on 2 men, Ross Sullivan and Arthur Lee Allen.
2 very famous suspects.
You're focusing on them because they perfectly illustrate the core tension that has plagued this entire case. The terrifying, seductive weight of circumstantial evidence versus the cold, hard, unforgiving reality of physical forensics.
It's a vital comparison.
Let's build a mental table. We have the suspect, the circumstantial case against them, and the physical clearance.
Let's begin with Ross Sullivan. The circumstantial profile is remarkably compelling.
Okay, tell us about him.
Ross Sullivan was an assistant at the library at Riverside City College in Southern California. In 1966, a young student named Cherry Jo Bates was brutally murdered in an alleyway directly outside that very library.
And there were letters.
A month later, tote letters were sent to the local paper claiming responsibility, and a morbid, highly disturbing poem was found carved into the underside of a folding desk in the college library.
Wait, didn't the Zodiac claim that murder later?
Years later, the Zodiac would officially claim the Bates murder as his own early work, though Riverside police have always heavily contested that claim.
Okay, so Sullivan is physically present at the scene of a crime tied deeply to the Zodiac mythology. What else builds the circumstantial case?
His physical appearance was a striking match for the famous composite sketches of the Zodiac from the Bay Area. He had a tight crew cut, he wore heavy, dark-rimmed glasses, and he was distinctly heavy-set with a round face.
And his clothes, right.
Furthermore, he wore military-style surplus clothing constantly. Specifically, he was known to wear wing walkers, the exact, somewhat obscure military-issue boots, whose specific tread footprints were found leading away from the Lake Berryessa crime scene.
Wow, so we have a library connection, a facial match to the sketches, and a footwear match to a confirmed crime scene. That is a heavy circumstantial load.
And psychologically, the case builds further. Sullivan suffered from severe, documented mental health issues, including bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, which resulted in multiple hospitalizations.
And he disappeared, right.
Most chillingly, immediately following the murder of Cherry Jo Bates, Ross Sullivan went missing. He didn't show up for work at the library for several days, and his coworkers reported his behavior as deeply unsettling and erratic when he finally returned.
And then he moved up north.
He later moved to Northern California in 1967, placing him in the exact right geographic area when the canonical Zodiac murders began in late 1968.
I mean, hearing that narrative, it sounds like an open and shut case. You can see why amateur sleuths latch onto him. But we have to move to the physical clearance. With all of that fitting so perfectly, Why wasn't Ross Sullivan ever charged or definitively linked to the crimes?
Because when you apply the rigorous scientific method, the narrative completely evaporates into a void of physical evidence.
There was nothing linking him.
Despite the compelling circumstantial alignment, there was zero hard forensic data linking him to any of the Bay Area crimes. No latent fingerprints matching his were found at any scene or on any letter.
What about the handwriting?
His handwriting, which is a massive component of the Zodiac investigation, given the sheer volume of letters sent, did not match the killer's distinct script. There was no DNA linkage.
And let's return to the biometrics we discussed at Lake Berryessa.
Exactly. While the facial sketches matched him, Sullivan was the massive individual. He was reportedly 6'2" and incredibly heavy, well over 250 pounds.
Right, which doesn't really match the best witness statements.
While we noted that the Lake Berryessa witnesses saw a tall man, many seasoned investigators felt Sullivan was simply too large, too tall, and too distinctively imposing to be the 5'8" to 5'10" man described by survivor Michael Mageau at Blue Rock Springs, or the man seen walking away from the Paul Stein murder in San Francisco.
So physically, he just didn't fit the most reliable description.
The physical biometrics, upon closer clinical scrutiny, fundamentally diverged.
Sullivan is a forensic ghost. Which brings us to the prime suspect, the big one, Arthur Leigh Allen.
Arthur Leigh Allen.
He is the only suspect ever publicly named by authorities. He is the central figure in Robert Graysmith's famous books and the David Fincher movie. Let's look at the circumstantial mountain against him.
The circumstantial evidence surrounding Arthur Leigh Allen is a collection of extraordinary, almost unbelievable coincidences.
Starting with where he lived.
Allen lived in Vallejo, the absolute epicenter of the early attacks. He wore size 10.5 shoes, the exact size as the Wingwalker prints at Berryessa.
And the watch. We have to talk about the watch.
He literally owned and wore a Zodiac brand watch, a watch given to him by his mother, which features the exact crosshair logo the killer used as his signature on every letter.
The watch alone is mind-bending, but the narrative gets much darker with the witness testimony.
In 1971, a former friend of Allen's named Don Chaney went to the police with a terrifying story. Chaney claimed that during a casual conversation in 1968 or 1969, Allen openly discussed a detailed fantasy of killing couples parked at lovers' lanes.
And the flashlight detail.
Chaney stated that Allen specifically said he would use a handgun with a flashlight taped to the barrel to illuminate targets for night shooting, the exact, highly specific tactical method the Zodiac detailed using in his letters.
And the name.
Furthermore, Chaney claimed Allen said he would call himself Zodiac and send taunting letters to the police.
It's essentially a detailed confession before the fact. And what about his own admissions to police when they finally interviewed him?
When police interviewed Allen in 1971, he actively, almost eagerly inserted himself into the timeline. Completely unprompted, he admitted that on the specific weekend of the Lake Berryessa attack, he was in the immediate area.
And the trunk of his car.
And then he casually mentioned to the detectives that he happened to have bloody knives in the trunk of his car that day.
His explanation for the bloody knives, he claimed he had killed a chicken for dinner.
A chicken?
A chicken. I mean, you literally cannot write fiction like that. And then you add the timeline of his incarceration.
The timing is very suspect.
The Zodiac communicated relentlessly with the press until early 1974 and then abruptly stopped. Complete silence. Why? In 1974, Arthur Leigh Allen was arrested and convicted for child molestation.
He went to prison.
He was sent to Atascadero State Hospital and was under strict probation until the early 1980s. The Zodiac's sudden, years-long silence aligns perfectly with Allen's incarceration.
And there was a lineup, too.
And to top it off, in 1991, decades after the Blue Rock Springs attack, survivor Michael Mageau was shown a photo lineup. He pointed directly to Arthur Leigh Allen's picture and said, "That's him. He's the man that shot me."
It paints a terrifyingly complete, deeply satisfying narrative picture. It makes sense. It ties up all the loose ends. But as investigators, we have to be rigorous. We have to look at the hard forensics that ultimately cleared Arthur Leigh Allen, much to the frustration of the police who were convinced they had their man.
Let's talk about tunnel vision. It's like looking up at the clouds. If you stare long enough wanting to see a dragon, your brain will absolutely build a dragon out of random water vapor.
You'll only see what you want to see.
You will ignore the parts of the cloud that don't fit the shape. Chaney's testimony, the watch, the chicken story that was the dragon. But what happens when the forensic wind blows the cloud apart? First, the handwriting. The guy sent over 20 letters.
Retired police handwriting expert Lloyd Cunningham, who worked on the case for decades, examined boxes of Allen's writing.
And what did he find?
Well, forensic handwriting analysis isn't just looking at how someone crosses a T. It's the subconscious pressure applied to the pen, the spatial relation between the baseline and the descending loops of a G or a Y, the specific ligatures connecting letters.
Very scientific.
Cunningham stated definitively that none of Allen's writing even came close to matching the Zodiac's distinct, deeply ingrained mechanical style.
Then there are the fingerprints. The killer left bloody, partial fingerprints on the cab of his final victim, Paul Stine. Arthur Lee Allen's fingerprints were tested against those latent prints multiple times over the decades. They were a definitive mismatch. But the most devastating blow to the Allen theory came from DNA. Let's explain how this actually works.
In 2002, the San Francisco Police Department Crime Lab managed to develop a partial DNA profile from a 1969 Zodiac letter. Specifically, they targeted the area beneath the postage stamp, looking for epithelial cells left behind by saliva when the sender licked the stamp.
Now, extracting 33-year-old degraded DNA from dried, chemical-laden glue is incredibly difficult. They use a process called polymerase chain reaction, or PCR.
Which is fascinating technology.
Yeah, PCR is basically molecular photocopying. They take a microscopic degraded fragment of DNA, heat it up to separate the double helix strands, cool it down to bind primers to the target sequences, and use enzymes to build a copy.
Just amplifying it.
They repeat this heating and cooling cycle dozens of times until they have millions of copies of that tiny fragment, enough to actually build a genetic profile.
Exactly. Because the sample was old and degraded by the stamp glue, PCR could only yield a partial profile, not a complete genetic fingerprint. However, a partial profile is still highly effective for exclusion.
So they checked it against Allen.
They compared this partial profile to Arthur Lee Allen's DNA. He was definitively excluded. He was not a match to the saliva on the stamp.
Now, Allen famously claimed to friends that he never licked his own stamps because the glue made him sick, leaving a tiny sliver of doubt for conspiracy theorists. But the hard scientific data we possess points entirely away from him.
Let's also look at the eyewitnesses, the people who actually saw and heard the killer, not just decades later in a photo lineup, but on the night of the crimes.
Officer Fook.
This is perhaps the most compelling exclusion. Officer Don Fook responded to the Paul Stine murder in San Francisco. Due to a dispatch error initially identifying the suspect as a black male, Fook and his partner almost certainly drove right past the Zodiac walking away from the crime scene.
But they saw him.
Officer Fook got a clear, well-lit look at the man under a street lamp. Years later, when asked specifically about Arthur Lee Allen, Fook was definitive. He said Allen was at least 100 pounds heavier than the man he saw that night, and that Allen's face was too round. He flatly rejected that Allen was the man he saw.
And the voice. The Zodiac called the police twice, at Berryessa and at Blue Rock Springs.
Nancy Slover was the police dispatcher in Vallejo, who took the Zodiac's call after the Blue Rock Springs attack. She heard his voice clearly. She described it as calm, monotonous, and somewhat taunting.
Did she ever hear Allen speak?
During the investigation into Allen, police had Slover listen to audio recordings of Arthur Lee Allen's voice. She definitively stated it was not the man she spoke to that night.
So, synthesizing the suspect matrix, the lesson is stark. Circumstantial evidence creates a seductive story. It fulfills our human need for narrative closure, but forensic evidence establishes reality.
You have to trust the data.
When the handwriting mechanics, the fingerprints, the PCR, DNA analysis, and the immediate fresh eyewitnesses all point away, you have to trust the data. Tunnel vision on a perfect suspect blinded investigators for decades.
Which brings us to the conclusion of our analysis of these files. The journey through the Zodiac's pathology is complex. We've traced his physical escalation to the terrifying theatrical ambush at Lake Berryessa.
We've mapped the intricate mathematical cage of the Z340 cipher and the brilliant algorithmic synthesis of engrams and human intuition that finally broke it.
And we've dismantled the circumstantial mythology surrounding Ross Sullivan and Arthur Lee Allen using the cold, hard tools of forensic science.
But you know, the relevance of this deep dive extends far beyond a 1960s cold case. The methodology used to finally break the Z340 cipher is a blaring warning bell for modern digital security.
It absolutely is. We are currently living in an era where major intelligence agencies are warning of harvest now, decrypt later threats.
What does that mean for us today?
It means what is perfectly secure today under current 256-bit encryption standards will be utterly vulnerable tomorrow when quantum computing and advanced AI algorithms catch up. The 51-year shelf life of the Zodiac Cipher is historical proof that secrets do not stay buried forever if the underlying mathematics are flawed or if technology evolves sufficiently.
That's a scary thought.
Furthermore, the modern reliance on forensic genealogy to solve cold cases, while incredibly powerful, is completely useless if the physical samples are contaminated, degraded, or absent, as they currently appear to be in the Zodiac case. The most advanced science in the world is only as good as the physical reality left behind at the scene.
I want to leave you with a final lingering thought straight from the cryptographic files. We celebrate the cracking of the 340-character cipher, but there are still unsolved codes.
The Z13 and Z32.
The Z13, which supposedly contains his actual name, and the Z32, which accompanied a map detailing a supposed bomb location. What if we were looking at them entirely wrong?
To understand the problem with the remaining codes, we have to look at Claude Shannon. Shannon is considered the father of information theory. He developed a concept known as unicity distance.
Unicity distance, okay.
In cryptography, unicity distance dictates that a cipher requires a minimum number of characters to guarantee a unique, mathematically verifiable solution. For a standard English substitution cipher, that minimum threshold is roughly 27 characters.
Think of it like a game of Wheel of Fortune, or trying to guess a password. If the password is 20 letters long and you guess 10 of them correctly, you can probably figure out the exact unique phrase.
Because there's enough data.
But if the password is only 3 letters long and you only know one letter, mathematically there are thousands of words it could be. You can never prove which one is the true password.
Exactly. The Z13 and Z32 fall far below Shannon's threshold for unicity distance, meaning, mathematically, thousands of different English phrases could fit those codes perfectly, and we would never have the statistical confidence to know which one is the correct solution.
Which makes me wonder, what if the Zodiac wasn't a master cryptographer at all?
He wasn't. We established that.
Right. What if he learned his lesson after the Hardens embarrassed him by cracking his first code in 8 days? Maybe he realized that the easiest, most foolproof way to never be beaten again is to simply cheat.
Just write nonsense.
What if those final, unsolvable codes are just mathematical bluffs? Pure gibberish, designed by a deeply narcissistic killer to ensure that we would be staring at the muddy waters forever, trying to solve a puzzle that has no answer, ensuring we never, ever stop talking about him.
It would be the ultimate final manipulation. A cage with no key.
A puzzle built of static, and 50 years later, we are still listening to it.